Before we get started with today's episode of the podcast, I just want to take a minute to tell you about a free masterclass for dance teachers that I have coming up soon. The NeuroFlex Masterclass, Identifying the Missing Link in Your Dancer's Flexibility, is happening on Sunday, February 2nd. The nervous system is queen when it comes to the body. It controls our ability to see, think, feel, breathe, and move. This means it controls our flexibility and mobility. Nervous system dysregulation is one of the biggest factors limiting a dancer's mobility that most teachers miss. In this masterclass, you'll learn about the link between the nervous system and mobility and how to harness the power of the nervous system to improve your dancer's flexibility. I would love to have you join me on Sunday, February 2nd. So for more information and to save your free spot in the masterclass, you can go to www.allegroperformance.com/masterclass. And now, here's today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erika Mayall. Today, I want to reopen an age-old debate about whether dance is art or whether dance is sport. This has been a question and a debate and potentially a controversy for as long as I remember in the dance world, but it gained a little bit of steam over the last little while. Specifically, what I want to dive into a little bit today is the UDA Nationals that were on. They were on this past weekend while I'm recording this, but this will air. They probably will have been on 10 days or 2 weeks ago or something like that. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, and if you maybe aren't on social media or things like that, maybe you're not aware, but the UDA is the Universal Dance Association, and they are a governing body, or an association, I guess. They're not a governing body. They're an association for dance teams in the United States. And so they have competitions. They also host like clinics and workshops and things like that. But they have competitions and they have the national finals. So this is where all of the college and university dance teams from within the U.S. go and compete in, I think it was in Walt Disney World. And it's gained a lot of popularity over the last few years, partially because there's a lot more media coverage of it now. So I think, I could be wrong about this, I did not look into this, but I think it was available to watch on like ESPN. Like I think some of the major sports networks are starting to air this like coverage of these finals. And so certainly that has gained some attraction to the event. And then also just on social media, there's so much more coverage of it and coverage from sport media outlets on social media. I know I saw posts popping up from different sort of sports media, social media channels that I follow, which I don't know if I remember that in previous years to have mainstream sports media like showcasing these dancers on their social media channels. So anyway, all that to say, it has gained a lot of popularity, and with that obviously has reopened a bit of the debate about whether dance is more of an art form or whether dance is more of a sport. And so there's a lot of people who have opinions one way or another and have been voicing those opinions on social media specifically. And there's been a lot of debate happening again. Social media, I'm in a bunch of these like Facebook groups with people from the dance community, whether it's studio owners or dance teachers or things like that. There's been a lot of debate going on. And so I thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about today, kind of from just my own perspective, and sort of what I've seen happening in the dance world over the last, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 years, and kind of how we got to this, or why we are still debating this topic. So first of all, I think I just want to say that I don't think that this needs to be an
either or scenario. I think this is a case of something that can be and. I think that dance can be an art form, and also it can be viewed as a sport or viewed as an athletic endeavor. And I talk about this a lot, and if you have been around for any length of time, you know that I'm a big sports fan. And so I just enjoy watching sports. I'm a sports fan, and so I really love sport and embrace that side of things. And from that lens, have recognized and appreciate that dancers are athletes. If we purely look at them from a physical standpoint and their physical capacity, we need to treat dancers as athletes. And this is not new news to any of you guys who have been around for a while. I have always been a big proponent of utilizing things that we know from sports medicine and from sports research and being able to apply some of those concepts to our dancers in order to enhance their health and their well-being. That being said, there's obviously another layer to dancers that is not just athlete. And I think one of the reasons why maybe the UDA Nationals recently have kind of stirred this debate again is that this event maybe is closer to sport or maybe views these athletes as more so just athletes than the kind of art side of things. And so some people feel the artistic side of dance is being lost when we're looking at these types of competitions and the things that the dancers are doing. I'm going to get into a little bit more about what exactly Dance Team is in a minute, because in my mind, there is room for it all. And I don't view, if I'm watching dance team type events, so things like the UDA finals, I'm not expecting the same type of experience as I am expecting if I am going to an art performance at a local theater or an opera house, or I'm going to see classical ballet, or I'm going to see something along those lines, or a more immersive artist experience with a site-specific piece or something like that. I have different expectations of what I am going to get out of it. And that doesn't mean that I enjoy one more than the other, or I think that one is superior to the other. I just think that there's room for nuance and there's room for appreciating both sides of that. And again, I'm a sports fan, so maybe when I'm viewing more of this dance team type stuff, I see it from a bit more of a sports lens, and so I still enjoy it, and I appreciate that that is maybe not for everyone. But conversely, there are people who absolutely love watching that type of dance, and maybe going to a ballet performance or a contemporary performance or any other type of sort of what we would consider quote unquote more of a traditional art form, maybe that is not for them. And so, like I said, I think there's nuance to this. I think it's a case of and I think we can have both. I don't think we need to choose one or the other. And I don't think it helps the dance industry at all to pit one against the other. And that's what I was seeing online a lot over the weekend, was people saying look at their technique. They're not even turning on a full high releve, and just literally nitpicking and pulling apart what these dancers were doing on stage. But like I said, it's a different style. They are trying to accomplish a different end goal than maybe what we expect when we're looking at other art or other styles of dance. So I think there's nuance to it. I don't think that one is superior to the other, but I also think there's not necessarily a great understanding of what dance team actually is. And so, like I said, I want to dive into just a little bit of it so that maybe if you're not familiar with it, you can kind of understand it a little bit more. And maybe that gives us a better appreciation of the differences between them and why they're both equally valid forms of dance. So I know there's a lot of listeners who are not from the US. I mean, I'm not from the US either, but we are close enough to the US that I think we're exposed to this a little bit more. But if you are tuning in from Australia or the UK or all of those other places where we have lots of listeners from, you might not be as familiar with what dance team is. And so I'm going to just pull some words straight from UDA's website. So they're the Universal Dance Association. and sort of pull words straight from their website because, like I said, like what they are and what they are doing is different than maybe what we think about with more traditional dance or dance studios. So Dance Team is focused on the traditional role of dance teams and believes that the primary purpose of the dancer is to support athletic programs and provide entertainment to the crowd before and during games. So you can see from their actual kind of like definition of dance teams that it is linked to athletics. It is linked to sport. Dancers are there to perform for the crowds and entertain the crowds and support the athletes in terms of crowd engagement and things like that. So dance team is similar, has similarities to things like cheerleading and things like that, but it is slightly different because they perform different styles of dance. But their whole system is rooted in performing in athletic events. And so when we take that into account, if the culture and the history of dance teams is rooted in sport, it makes sense that what we view or how we perceive it is much more like sport than maybe it is like traditional art forms. In these competitions, or specifically at UDA Nationals, there's different divisions. So you might have seen, like if you've seen any of these videos floating around, you might have seen like different kind of divisions. And so they compete in D1A, which is like NCAA 1 schools and it's larger schools. Or there's the D1 division, which is still NCAA 1 schools, but the like smaller schools in those divisions. And then there's an open division. So that could be NCAA 2 or 3 schools, it could be junior colleges, it's NAIA schools, it's things like that. And if these words mean absolutely nothing to you, basically all of that means is they follow the same divisions that college sports do in the US. So when you're watching college football or volleyball or basketball or whatever it is, they have those same divisions. So you'll hear people refer to like Div 1 schools or Division 1 schools, and that's kind of like the top tier of athletic programming. And again, it has to do with like size of the school and things like that. And so for these competitions, for like the UDA Nationals, they're competing in those same categories. And so there's going to be smaller schools competing in open categories, but we have the big schools like the Ohio States and Minnesota and like those top schools competing in the Div 1 divisions. Then there's also categories that they compete in. And so it's broken down into kind of what they are showcasing and what we, or at least, and this is probably just like a bias of my social media, but what I see a lot of showcased is the jazz and the hip hop and things like that. But there are other events that they can and are competing in as well. So they have game day dance as one of the events. There's a spirit program for game day. There's game day live, which like includes their school bands and things like that. But then there is a jazz category, there is a hip hop category, and there is a pom category. And those are the ones that we, like I said, see maybe popping up more on social media. And then people are trying to compare those directly with other kind of styles of dance or forms of dance and sort of saying, you know, we're losing the artistry or what have you. But like I said, there's all these other categories that involve like game day cheers and pep rallies. And I don't actually know all the specifics, but I just know that it is like much more in-depth than just us seeing them do like a jazz routine on stage. Like there's more involved. And like I said, it really is steeped in the American college sports culture, which if you've never experienced, like if you're not from the US, it's sometimes hard to like wrap your head around what that culture is, but it is like a whole beast in and of itself. And Dance Team is just like one aspect of that is like steeped in that culture. And so, like I said, we have all of these different divisions and then we have these different genres. What we are seeing the dancers showcase in these genres, and especially if we look at the jazz, or I mean, honestly, it doesn't even matter if it's jazz or hip hop or pom, but what we are seeing is like absolutely phenomenal displays of athleticism, of precision, of power, of technicality. Like the level that these dancers are dancing at is unreal. And it just keeps getting higher and higher and higher every year. Like every year I watch and I'm just blown away. And if you haven't seen any of these videos, I will try and put a few of them in the show notes. And I definitely recommend checking it out because like the turn sequences that are required to be part of these dances and just some of the elements that are part of it are like absolutely mind-blowing. And you cannot watch these dancers and not appreciate viewing them as athletes. Like their athleticism is absolutely through the roof. And the skills that they are required to have to even make it onto their university dance teams are incredibly difficult skills. So all of this, I guess, to say that when we're watching this, we really do have to appreciate that these dancers, whether we want to view dance as an art or view dance as a sport, these dancers are athletes and they are performing like athletes. And I think that we need to support them and treat them like athletes. So one of the things, and I don't know if this has changed in recent years, I actually haven't really chatted with many of my American colleagues about this recently, but one of the things that I always find really fascinating and slightly disheartening is maybe the right word, is that at a lot of these big university programs, or maybe not even the big ones, but at these schools, although dance team, like we've talked about, is like ingrained in the athletics programs and the athletics departments, the dance team athletes are often not able to access resources that other student athletes are on campus. So they're kind of this weird in between. And I know at some schools, they're not actually like considered part of the athletic department. They're actually just considered like a club on campus or things like that. And that is one of the reasons why they're not able to access some of the support. I do know some of the universities do support their dancers and they might have access to things like healthcare resources and things like that, but they won't have the same access that the student athletes have. Like there'll be some sort of a clinic or, healthcare team that student athletes can access, and the dancers will usually have like a separate program or a separate group of people. It's usually severely underfunded and in some cases, maybe like not funded at all. It might be practitioners who are volunteering their time to be part of it. But that's one of the issues that kind of surround some of this dance team stuff, is that because we debate so much about whether they are, a sport or whether it is art or whatever it is we want to call it, we don't necessarily get taken as seriously as maybe we should be. And so in some of these instances, that means that things like funding and access to services and stuff is limited because of that. Whereas I think or feel that if we fully embraced, especially these dancers, like dance team dancers, as athletes and call it a sport and view it from that very, very athletic lens, maybe that allows opportunities for those dancers to actually be given opportunities that other student athletes are being given. Because these dancers are not training any less hard than other student athletes are, and they're not sustaining any less injuries, and they're not requiring less support from like a mental health or other like well-being parameters, but they just don't have access to resources the same way that other student athletes do generally on campuses. So that's just something that I think is worth considering, and something that hopefully now that there is more and more awareness and we're seeing more publicity and we're seeing more coverage of dance teams on mainstream media, hopefully we will start to see that changing and we'll start to see these dancers receiving the support that they are absolutely deserving of. And it's not just in terms of healthcare when we think about like how we need to support these dancers and how we can benefit them if we do think of them a little bit more like athletes. Some of the stuff that they also should be able to access or should have sort of the resources for are things just like cross-training and conditioning and things like that. Like I've heard stories, and again, I don't know if this is true in all schools, but I've heard lots of stories about dance team dancers not being able to access the gym that other varsity athletes can access, and not having access to strength and conditioning coaches and trainers and things like that. And so this is something we also need to consider when we're thinking about how can we support these dancers as dance athletes or artistic athletes, it's not just access to medical resources. It's the entire picture. It's how are we setting up their training programs? How are we promoting cross-training? How are we supporting them from the mental health side of things? How are we supporting them from a nutrition side of things? It's honestly so much more than just can they access like physio or the doctor or things like that. So if we truly want to support these dancers, we need to make sure that we're supporting them in all ways. And that doesn't just happen at the university level. I think that also happens when these younger dancers are starting to aspire to make it onto a university dance team. So for a lot of dancers who are dancing in a studio setting, their dream or goal may not be to, make it into a ballet company or to make it onto Broadway or any of those other sort of like historically traditional dance paths. A lot of these dancers are now aspiring to make it onto the University of Minnesota dance team or the Ohio State dance team or any of the other top university dance teams. A lot of these dancers are looking at dance team as what they want to have their next step in dance be. And so we need to make sure that we are supporting dancers in those avenues as well. And I know in the dance world, and particularly in maybe like the studio world, there's been a lot of debate about like the use of tricks and things like that within especially competition dance. And so, like acro tricks and things like that have been more common in recent years than they used to be. And there's definitely like controversy surrounding that. I will be the first to say that I don't love seeing certain dance styles. And, I don't necessarily want to go see like a lyrical dance that has a whole bunch of back handsprings in it or things like that. But when we think about the training environments that these dancers are in a studio setting as they're growing up, if these dancers have goals and aspirations of dancing on dance teams, there is a certain amount of tricks and skills that they are going to need to know how to do. And so for us to just like blindly close our eyes and say, do you know what? I'd actually prefer that there aren't aerials and handsprings like in contemporary dances. That doesn't serve those dancers. Those dancers are going to either go out and teach themselves to do those tricks, which can often end poorly, or they're going to end up going and finding an environment that can help them reach those goals. And so I'm sure if you are working in the US, you probably have an idea of like what the skills and like the things that dancers need to be able to do. But for those of you who are maybe less familiar with dance team, just to give you a rough idea, I pulled the skill sheet for the University of Minnesota, like the skills required for people to be able to audition for the University of Minnesota dance team. This isn't the whole list of things, but just to give you an example of what they need to be able to do at a minimum just to be able to audition is they need to have a quintuple pirouette on the right side, a left side triple pirouette. They need to be able to showcase turn combos that incorporate Alisa conturns. They have changing spots, floats, all sorts of other elements within these turn combos. They need to be able to do an aerial. They need to be able to demonstrate a whole bunch of different kind of leaps. So whether that's like jetés, calypsos, firebirds, switch leaps, all of those types of things. So those are the minimums that these dancers need in order to be able to audition and kind of continue on to dance teams. And so if we as dance teachers are not providing them with the skills to learn these sort of quote unquote tricks, then we're probably going to lose some of these dancers to their high school dance teams or to other studios that are teaching this. And so I'm not saying that you need to go out and teach all your dancers these tricks and then throw them into like every competition piece that you're doing. But I do think that there can be a balance between, having your choreography and your dances and things still look the way you want them to look and feel the way you want them to feel, but also having technique classes or open classes or whatever you want to call it, where maybe you do work on some more of these sort of specific skills. Because what I see a lot in the dance world is teachers who maybe that's not their ideal of what they want dance to look like. They want dance to be, more based in like historical, traditional, like art form and things like that. And so they just shy away from that completely. They just say, do you know what? I don't think that should be part of dance, and therefore I'm not going to teach that. But then they're going to lose dancers. And if you're fine with that, then like absolutely you can be fine with that. But if you're wanting to be able to continue to engage these dancers, as these dancers have different goals, we need to meet them where they're at, and we need to be able to support them in reaching these goals. And so maybe that is making sure that they can do an aerial, and so we have the skills or the resources to be able to teach them to do an aerial. Or like there's different flexibility skills that they need to be able to have as well. And so they're looking for like fairly high levels of flexibility within these dancers. And I know a lot of teachers who hesitate to really push flexibility because they are rightfully so concerned about the, safety of some of this kind of extreme stretching and things like that. And I absolutely 100% understand where teachers are coming from in that perspective. But at the same time, if we have these dancers who are required to do some of these flexibility skills to be able to audition for whatever program they want to be able to audition for, it is our responsibility to find a way to be able to teach these dancers to get there safely. And that's one of the things that we cover like in my kind of flexibility foundations course is how do we help our dancers achieve the levels of flexibility required for today's dance world, which are significantly higher than they used to be, in a way that is not going to be damaging to them. And so as teachers, whether it's flexibility skills or whether it is, acrobatic tricks or whether it's turning or what have you, we want and need to be able to meet these dancers where they're at and then take them to the next level, regardless of whether we think that there should be aerials in competition dance or in concert dance or things like that. There are dancers out there who are still looking for these skills. And like I said, if that's not you, then that's 100% fine. But then you also need to be fine with letting these dancers go somewhere else or find that training somewhere else, because if we watch what we see at these dance team national events, like those are the skills that those dancers need to be able to get to. So again, it's just different perspectives of whether it is, more of an art form or more of a sport. And like I said, I think it can be both. We can embrace all aspects of it. So I will wrap that up there today. I would love to hear your thoughts about any of this in terms of if you have strong opinions one way or another, art versus sport or anything in between. Send me an email or reach out to me on social media. I would love to chat with you about it. And I think that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.